Next up, we have Nina Vyedin on hacking the English language.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Is this too loud? Is this good? Awesome. So my name is Nina Vyedin, and this marks the start of my 20-minute break of eating my way through Portland. So I hope it's going to go okay. I'm really hungry already, so hide your food. All right. When I started college, every freshman in our year had to take a writing course. They were kind of like trying to beat good writing into you, and there was no way to get out of it, no matter what kind of overachiever you were in high school. And I still remember the first paper I ever got back, because I did really, really well. It didn't have a grade, because our English department didn't give grades. They gave check marks, sometimes with a plus or a minus. So my first paper, I got a check mark with 2 pluses. So I'd done like really, really well. So I sat down to write the next paper. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, this one is going to be even better because I am a check plus plus kind of writer. And I actually still have a copy of that. Let me show you how far I got. Yeah, it's pretty, isn't it? So this did not get me a check plus plus. It did get me an extension, thankfully. And it also got me thinking about ways to make writing easier on myself. Because the funny thing is that I wasn't stuck because I'd done poorly. I was stuck because I'd done well, and I wanted to do well again, and I was stressing out over it. And when you're under pressure, the worst place to be is here, at the beginning. So fast forward about 5 years, and now I work for a software company that makes developer tools to help people build better mobile apps. And let me show you what our customers see when they make a new application with our product. So it's filled out with code. And not only does it build, but it runs as well. So this is friggin' awesome. Like, how cool would it be if you could just start a doc and it would be a doc right away? Like, this is already an app. Well, an empty app, but it's okay. One sec. So today we're going to talk about hacking writing. And when I say hacking, I don't mean it in like a lifehacks.com kind of way. I mean actually applying programming practices to the art of writing. Because at the end of the day, we're both content creators. And whether our programming friends like to admit it or not, we're both writing things that other people have to see. So I want to talk about the things that we can steal from programmers. And I think the first thing we should absolutely be stealing is this. If you walk out of here with nothing from this talk, I just want you to know that that exists. So the first thing you should be stealing is this. Don't start with a blank page. Make your Hello World doc. And use a template, and it doesn't have to be just your org's template, although that can be a good place to start. Find the things you like and make a template out of that. Make a template for every single kind of document that you find yourself writing often. And if you're writing a new type of document, find examples that you like and turn them into templates. So good documentation can be a template. Blog posts can be templates. Even your favorite reference docs can be a template. It's not about the content. You're just interested in the presentation and the structure and the feel that you can steal from this kind of stuff that you like. So find these examples and put them together in a place where you can be inspired by them. Just start somewhere because your programmer friends do. All right. So recently, I was mentoring a new writer through her first doc. And we had this kind of back and forth going. She was supposed to be writing about a visual tool that we just created. But she kept adding all this stuff about iOS storyboards and using iOS storyboards into the doc. And I'd put a comment on whatever section she'd written in. I'd be like, well, this doesn't quite belong here. And she'd kind of just like move it to a different part of the doc. So finally, after like chasing this down for a while, I sat down with her and I said, Amy, what question do you think this doc is supposed to answer? And she said, well, the question it's supposed to answer is, how do I use storyboards with this new tool? So I sat her down again and I said, look, we already have documentation that answers the question, how do I use a storyboard? What your doc needs to answer is, how do I use this new tool? So she wasn't doing anything wrong. We were just asking different questions. And the doc kept diverging. So what we need to do is start asking the right questions together. So I wondered, what practice can we borrow from our programmer friends that would help us get on the same page with this doc? And that is to make a doc for a doc. So engineering teams make tools and features to create products. Our documentation is our product. So make a spec. And I know it sounds like overkill, but it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be a long doc. What you have to do is, it's enough to just define the questions you're answering for your readers and for yourself. And to make sure that everyone involved in this doc is aware of them. So what kind of questions can we ask? Well, for example, questions that help us know what the audience is expecting to learn. Summarize the entire doc in one question, just like I had Amy do. And figuring out the target audience, who's going to be reading it. And figuring out the current state of the documentation on that topic, whether it's inside your own documentation tool or site, or third-party resources. Because this isn't just going to change what you write, it's going to change how you write. All right. So now we've got a template and a mini spec. The next step for most of us is to make an outline, right? You want to get the structure down. And I'm a big fan of outlines because it gets you thinking about structure before you actually start writing. But the problem that I have with outlines, and I'm sure many of you can relate, is that the outline I make at the beginning of the doc is never the outline of the doc at the end. And every time that I change that structure and rearrange, I have to rewrite because it changes the flow. So I wondered, what solution do developers and programmers have as a better tool for architecting their work? So how many of you guys have heard of design patterns? How many of you guys love them? How many of you guys think they're the worst? All right, you thought you were making friends with the people at your table. So however you feel about design patterns, so quickly, you know if you don't. Design patterns are essentially prescriptions for solving particular types of problems in code. So a pattern describes the problem, the solution, and when to apply the solution, and consequences. So for example, if the problem is that you need exactly one instance of an object in your code, you could apply the singleton pattern, and it's already an architecture that's been developed for you. And so I thought, you know, this doesn't just apply to code. In fact, I do improvisational comedy, and when you get into long-form comedy, a lot of that is about design patterns. You're working within a structure, that's been kind of optimized to be very funny, and you're improvising within a structure. So I thought, why not apply this to documentation? And I think there's something to be said for exploring a systematic, solution-oriented approach in some types of writing. So I'm asking you guys to consider this. Don't just start with an outline. Start with an architecture. Know what type of document you're writing, and then make the outline. So what are some examples of a doc's design pattern? Well, it's really up to you. Your patterns are the docs that you find yourself writing often. So a few examples from our org. We have a lot of docs that are walkthroughs. They're stories. They follow a linear timeline. Length really matters because we're guiding the reader through the plot. And flow is extremely important. And then on kind of the opposite side of the spectrum, we have a lot of reference docs where length doesn't matter at all because the way that the reader's going to consume is that they're going to go in, they're going to enter a search term, and they're going to find whatever it is they're looking for. So our goal in that is to include as much information as possible so that they can find what they're looking for. And the thing is that many of us adopt these patterns anyway as we go. But I think that if we consciously pick one, we're already thinking about structure at the beginning. And I find that the more I hone in on a pattern and sort of figure out what makes it work, figure out what kind of the salient parts of it are, the easier time I have writing the next doc. So that's design patterns in writing. Try it out. So I think one of the things we work for the most in writing is clarity. So it breaks my heart when I see things like this. I don't know what it is. So I actually felt some of you guys cringe, so that's good, I'm in the right crowd. I don't know what it is here, and I don't know what's getting stopped. So is it the first activity? Is it the second activity? Is it the intent? Who knows? All right, so this is passive voice, but worse than that, this is actually one of my pet peeves because to me, I don't know how this window gets created. I don't know what creates it. And to me, this makes it seem like magic. So it's creating more questions than it actually answers, right? And then worst of all, this. All right, so if you can't figure out what to call something in your writing, calling it 12 different things in the span of the same blog post is possibly the worst thing you could do because it confuses the hell out of me. So again, I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying it's a check minus. We can do better. Open any decent introduction to programming, and you'll find a section on naming your variables. It's sort of a cornerstone of good programming. And I happen to think it's a cornerstone of good writing as well. Name your ideas. Be specific. So here's some common variable naming problems I've come across. The undefined it, where you're not sure what it's referring to. The lack of ownership or passive voice, where things just happen out of magic or out of thin air. Now, vague terms is an interesting one. It's where you start referring to things by vague programming terms. Like, for example, calling anything you see on the screen a view. Now, if you're writing about, you can get away with this sometimes, but for example, if you're writing about iOS development, a UI screen is a very particular specific thing, it's a class, and that's what you call, or sorry, a UI view is a very specific thing, it's a class. So when you refer to something as a view, I don't know if you're talking about the UI view or views in general, and it becomes confusing. So, and last but not least, the idea with no name. And this is actually kind of a gift because if something is unnamed out there and you introduce it and give it a specific name, people are going to be very grateful for that, and it might catch on. So I open that up for you guys to do. Okay. Last but not least, I want to talk about editing. And it's one of my favorite topics because I think the way we approach reviewing each other's writing, especially in peer reviews, says a lot about our skill and our background, or just as much as our writing. So what I found, especially in peer editing, is that most people will do kind of a surface scratch. They'll edit for grammar, they'll edit for spelling, they might throw in a couple technical questions, but very few people, unless they're trained as editors, will edit for structure or flow. So I wanted to change that within our org because we do peer edit, and I think it's a great resource, but I wanted to make sure that people were using it well. So what I wanted to do was find a really concrete and actionable definition of editing for us to use, something that we could get behind. So I started off the way most of us would start, and just with a Google search. So edit, to prepare written material for publication by correcting, condensing, or otherwise modifying it. This describes the mechanics of editing. Yes, correcting and condensing, but it doesn't really tell me what to look for as an editor. So I thought, okay, this is pretty broad. This refers to all of editing. What if we just focused in on a particular thing? So I went to Wikipedia and I looked up technical editing. Technical editing involves reviewing text written on a technical topic, identifying usage errors, and ensuring adherence to a style guide. This is a little bit better. It throws in the style guide. It's a little more actionable. It tells me what to look for. But it still doesn't really tell me the spirit of how to edit. So it's better, but it's not great. So I turned to our friend code, and especially the definition of code refactoring, which is the process of restructuring existing computer code, changing the factoring, without changing its external behavior. So, and I absolutely love this definition, this approach, because it's totally focused on making content more readable, more simple, and more expressive, but without changing the fundamental question it's supposed to answer. More importantly, I think this opens up the reviewer to changing the structure of the doc. And this is absolutely what we should be doing when we review each other's work. So I'll leave you with this. Don't just edit. Refactor. Dig into it, rip things out, rearrange stuff. Just don't change the questions that the content is supposed to answer. And ask questions about things that you don't know about, even if you're not the expert on the topic. One of the things I love about technical editing is that it's taught me that I don't have to be the expert on a topic to be a good editor, although background in research does help. I just have to be a very attentive reader. And I have to ask questions as I go along, because if it's confusing to you, it's going to be confusing to your reader as well. All right. So as a quick review, here are just 5 simple things that we can borrow from our programming friends to make our writing easier, more productive, and more importantly, more fun for all of us. Thank you, guys. So, just one plug that I'm going to make. I work for Xamarin, and we are hiring awesome people, so, you know, call me.
Awesome. Questions?
Yeah. There's one question.
Could you just go back over to your architecture
Sure.
screen? I mean, is that the basic sort of, or all the categories of documents that you see, or is there anything else?
There are more. I've been trying, I mean, obviously I throw in things like blog posts and stuff. This isn't an exact science at the moment. I've just kind of been trying to find patterns, and these are the ones that I find commonly. But I think because different orgs have different requirements and write different things, the idea is that there isn't like a book that you can go out and find all the design patterns like there would be in programming. And even in programming, you know, there's design patterns, but you're always kind of adjusting them. It's never the perfect Band-Aid to put on something, you know? So the idea is try to find patterns in what you do every day, and then try to figure out what makes those patterns work. And then as you go, you'll kind of solidify on certain topics. Does that make sense? Thanks.
I have a question.
Sure.
As you mentioned, I think that maybe one of the more common views of editing is that it is just to be for, you know, grammar, typos, that sort of surface level stuff.
Yeah.
Have you had any friction getting to that deeper level with certain members on your team? And if so, how did you overcome it?
I have to say I'm extremely lucky in that my team is friggin' awesome. I've never had issues with somebody saying, oh, like when I dig in deeper into a doc, I've never had issues with pushback. But I think that is a cultural thing. I'm trying to think of what I would do. I would probably try to, I mean, culture comes from higher ups. I would probably go to somebody higher up in the company and try to get that as a standard. But mostly, just being able to have a good communication with that person, like being friends with that person helps, right? Like because getting your writing edited is such a personal thing. It really feels like someone's like, the way you think is wrong, but it doesn't have to be, you know. And if it becomes more of a friendly exchange, it's good. Peer editing also helps, I think, because then you kind of see each other's weaknesses, so it's a little easier. Does that help? Answer your question. Cool. Great question, by the way.
You can do one more.
Hi. One other thing that might be borrowed from programmers is like a shared repository of these scripts and other things. Has anybody started that, or shall we start that?
I think we should start that. But what do you mean by scripts? Do you mean like the patterns?
The patterns, precisely.
I think that's a great idea. Let's do that right now. I think you should start that, and I think you should send it out and link everybody, and we'll make our own design patterns. It'll be awesome. Yeah, tweet it. Hashtag write the docs. I think you can ask later.
No worries. So returning to the question before the last one,
Sure.
for people on your team, I find that I'll go through and spend a lot of time restructuring somebody's document, and they are so grateful. They're more than happy for me to do it the next time. I'm wondering if you found a good motivation or way to get people on your team who are writers to start learning to do it themselves. What has your training technique been? I've had trouble with that.
So we have a pretty small team, but for new people, you know, I've been kind of helping mentor somebody. I think the best way is to sort of ask. I really like question-based approaches, so like ask them questions about what they think the doc should be like, what is it answering, like who are the readers, so the beginning questions, but also you know, what they think the structure should be. Like in comments I'll be like, do you really think this belongs here? Like what about here? So kind of, because they actively have to answer it, it's a little bit less of me just going through and making the doc what I think it should be. On the other hand, it makes the editing process go about twice as slow. So it's a lot of like, well, they might answer it correctly, they might not, and if they don't, you have to mentor it. So it's a trade-off, but I think it's worth it in the long run. Okay. Does that answer? Okay. Thanks.
We'll do one last one.
I just wanted to expand real fast on Nina's answer about peer reviews and developmental edits. My name's Brian, and Nina actually is in my org at Xamarin. And one of the things, so she mentioned this thing called peer edits, and this is something that we sort of pioneered at Xamarin. And when I first started the org, all docs went through me, and it wasn't really scalable. And so we implemented this thing where once everyone got trained up, everyone sort of, we call it an anarchic dictatorship in my org, and so everyone really edits each other's docs now. And it's been really, really fantastic, but there's a difference between copy editing and developmental edits, and we really expect, like, during the peer review process or peer edits that people are doing deep developmental edits as well as the copy stuff. So just to kind of expand on
That's kind of where that came from.
your answer there.
Thanks, Brian. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.